Welcome and thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. After the presentation, we will conduct the question-and-answer session. To ask a question, please press star followed by the number 1. This call is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this point. Now, I will turn the meeting over to your host, Jacob Fitzsimanu. Sir, you may begin.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders webinar on 2020 census planning. My name is Jake Fitzsimanu, Jr. I'm a member of the President's Advisory Commission on Asian American and Pacific Islanders and also the Census Bureau's National Advisory Committee. Now, since the first decennial census over 150 years ago, census data has been a critically important tool for understanding population trends and determining how to allocate resources. Census data has also been central to implementing and monitoring and evaluating a whole range of civil rights laws and policies, including housing, education, healthcare, jobs, and voting. However, implementing the census count is not easy, right? Particularly in communities that are hard to reach due to geographic or linguistic, technological, or other barriers. And today's webinar will cover some of the research and strategies that Census is planning to implement in order to overcome these barriers and to ensure that the 2020 census is successful. Before I introduce our esteemed speaker, though, let me cover some basic housekeeping items. Firstly, all participants are in listen-only mode. 2, at the conclusion of the presentation, we'll facilitate questions and answers and provide instructions on how to unmute your line. This webinar is off the record and closed to the press, and this webinar is being recorded, so it'll be publicly available on WHIAAPI's YouTube page within the next few days. Now, at this time, I'm very pleased and honored to introduce Dr. Jennifer Kim, Chief of the Content, Language, and Data Products Branch at the U.S. Census Bureau. Dr. Kim spearheads the work on the 2020 Census Questionnaire content across all data collection modes, language assistance to respondents of limited English proficiency, and data products and dissemination. In 2015, she led the 2015 National Content Test, a major survey that reached 1.2 million households to help determine the best content for the 2020 census. Dr. Kim also serves as the lead language expert for the Census Bureau National Advisory Committee Language Working Group, and as a chair of the Census Bureau Improving Operational Efficiencies team, she led an interdivisional team that led to the creation of a translation office at the Census Bureau. Prior to her current position, Jennifer led the 2015 Census Test Automated Training Team, which built the first ever online training program for field enumerators. She also led the 2010 Census Language Program Assessment, provided training and technical assistance to national statistical agencies in places like Sudan, India, Guyana, and Bangladesh, and also led the 2008 survey of Compact of Free Association migrants on the island of Guam. Jennifer holds a PhD in International Education Policy from the University of Maryland, a master's degree in Education Policy and Administration from the University of Southern California, as well as a bachelor's degree in Linguistics and Spanish from the University of Michigan. We're really pleased to have such an esteemed speaker with us today. Thank you for being with us, Dr. Kim. The time is now yours.
Thank you so much. I just want to start off by saying that I really appreciate the opportunity to present the 2020 Census Operational Plan to you today. As Jake has already said, my name is Jennifer Kim, and I have the privilege of overseeing the areas of questionnaire content, language assistance, and data products in the Decennial Census Management Division. So today I will be sharing an overview of our 2020 program and where we are in preparations as we look to deploy our next decennial census in 2020. As we think about the purpose of the 2020 census is to conduct a census of population and housing and to deliver the results to the President, the states, and the American people. The U.S. Constitution mandates a census every 10 years, and the census is a count of every individual residing in the United States. Individuals are generally counted within households, and information is typically collected about the housing unit. The census data we collect are used for a wide variety of purposes. The primary reason is to apportion the representation among states. Other additional uses of these data include by states, tribes, local governments, to draw congressional and state legislative districts, school districts and voting precincts, by the Department of Justice to enforce voting rights and civil rights legislation, by other federal agencies to distribute over $400 billion each year to the states, to inform federal, tribal, state, and local government planning decisions, as well as informing businesses and nonprofit organization decisions such as where to locate, the size of the market, and so forth. Now, as we think about planning the census, we must design a census for both the environment today and what we believe the environment will be like at the time of the census. As we think about the census, a program as large and complex as what we do, we have to think about this from a number of ways. We have been planning the 2020 census long before today, long before last year, and it's more than a 10-year planning effort for us to do this. These constraints are important for us to think about as we lay out the design of the census. So let me talk about a few of the challenges that we are experiencing. One, the declining response rates. Response rates for Census Bureau surveys and for surveys and censuses in general have declined as people are overloaded with requests for information and become increasingly concerned about sharing information. In general, people are inundated with information, and one more request is just that, one more request. For the census, where we have to count people once, only once, and in the right place, we need to overcome that and motivate people to respond. Another challenge that we face is having to plan for the increasingly complex living arrangements and population. Households are becoming more diverse and dynamic, making it a challenge to associate an identified person to a single location. For example, blended families include children who have two primary residences. Additionally, some households include multiple relationships and generations. These are factors we need to take into account as we are thinking about how we are going to conduct the census and how we're going to ensure we are going to count everyone. Another challenge is having a very mobile population. The U.S. continues to be a highly mobile nation as about 12% of the population moves in a given year. So continued growth in the use of the cell phone technology and reduction in landlines that are tied to physical locations also complicate enumeration. Our goal for the census is not only to count people, but to count the people where they are, so these data can be used for apportionment and redistricting. And with a population as mobile as ours, this is a challenge. Another challenge I'd like to point out today is technology. This is a census that we are infusing technology throughout the entirety of the census, which brings innovation, new ideas, efficiency, and increased quality, but also brings a challenge. We are building a technology that are built today, yesterday, or last year for a census we're going to conduct in 2020. This is a challenge that we have to take into consideration as we plan for the census. Last consideration to point out today is the unsustainable rising cost of the census. If we were to repeat the same design of the 2010 census, we estimate this would cost about $17.8 billion to run the census. Based on the work that we have done and proposed for 2020, we estimate that the 2020 census will cost $12.5 billion, which is more than $5 billion in cost avoidance. We can look at another way. The 2020 census will realize a lower cost per housing unit than the 2010 census, and that's adjusting for inflation. In other words, using the same technology from 2010, the census will cost approximately $124 per housing unit. But using the new methodology that we are planning for 2020, the census will cost $88 per housing unit. As you all know, the paper and pencil census is a census of the past, and we need to design a census for today. So how did we design a census? We thought about all the aforementioned challenges and what it was that we needed to do. We recognized that in the next census, we will be trying to reach an increasingly diverse and growing population. We project there will be 330 million people in the United States living in more than 140 million housing units around the time of the next census. Our overarching goal of counting everyone once, only once, and in the right place may sound simple, but we must count each and every one of them, more than 330 million people, in a complex environment. In addition, we are planning to conduct a 2020 census at a lower cost per housing unit than 2010, while maintaining high-quality results. So with these in mind, our 2020 Census Research and Testing Program has focused on 4 key innovation areas that serve to bring the greatest cost savings for the 2020 census. First, re-engineered address canvassing. Second, optimizing self-response. Third, utilizing administrative records and third-party data. And fourth, re-engineering field operations. So what I'm going to do next is walk you through each of those key innovation areas and talk about the census design. So let's begin with re-engineered address canvassing. The first step in conducting the 2020 census is to identify all of the addresses where people live or could live. In other words, we establish where to count. For 2010, our field workers canvassed over 9 million census blocks to update our list. In 2020, we will be doing 100% in-office address canvassing, which is where a majority of the work is going to be done, and about 25% in-field address canvassing, which will cover about 25% of all the addresses. For 2020, we will reduce the nationwide in-field address canvassing by developing innovative methods for updating and maintaining the Census Bureau's address list and spatial database throughout the decade. First, we will be continually researching and updating our master address files. This will be an ongoing process for in-office address canvassing. I want to make it clear that we will still be canvassing the entire nation. We will simply be canvassing the entire nation differently. For the 2020 census, the Census Bureau has begun an in-office review of 100% of the nation's addresses. This is called in-office address canvassing. We will continually update the address list and maps based on data from multiple sources, including the U.S. Postal Service, tribal, state, local governments, satellite imagery, third-party data providers. The work we are going to do at our National Processing Center is using a combination of aerial imagery and administrative and programmatic data that we have to help us understand where change is occurring in the address space on the ground. So, for example, we can look at 2 vintages of imagery and look at a neighborhood and see that there was no growth, no new housing units. But in a later vintage of the same imagery, there is growth, and that can help us. This information is also confirmed by administrative data that we receive from U.S. Postal Service. For example, we receive information where people are receiving mail, what addresses are active in terms of mail, and that helps inform it. We're also using private sector information and using it in office to allow us to understand where change is occurring on the ground, where we need to do in-field canvassing. Now, we recognize that although we are going to be doing 100% of in-office address canvassing, there are some things we cannot see by using data or imagery. That will require a fieldwork component where we are required to go out and look at the neighborhood and look at the housing unit. Take, for an example, an urban area that may have large multi-unit structures. Through the imagery, we see a multi-unit structure. However, what we don't know from that picture is how many units might be under that roof of that structure. So with the information that we get from Postal Service, we would know how many addresses within it are receiving mail, but we might not know about the other sublets that are not captured. Again, our goal of the census is to count everyone once, only once, and in the right place. To do that, we need to have an accurate frame. Another example of where we might have to go in-field is in rural areas where there is a lot of ground cover. The tree density might be very high, and when we look at pieces of imagery, we cannot see below those trees and might need to go out there to confirm what's on the ground. Fast-growing areas might be another part of the country where some in-field work is needed. Now, based on the research and testing done in the last few years, we estimate that we will need to do somewhere around 25% of the address in-field. This is a vast reduction from walking nearly 6 million blocks that we did in 2010. This office work will determine which parts of the country require field work to verify address information. While field work will begin this year on a small scale, the bulk of what we call the in-field address canvassing will begin in 2019 and is anticipated to cover approximately 25% of all addresses. This is a significant reduction from the 100% of the blocks that we walked during 2010. Finally, we want to ensure we are doing this accurately. We know we are going to be doing 100% in-office review and 25% in-field review. We want to know we are going to the right places. Now, we are also implementing an ongoing master address file coverage study. What we will be doing in this study is taking a random sample of about 20,000 blocks and going out and walking those blocks. We'll be taking that information back and comparing it to what we did in office and what we did in field to give us a sense of how our procedures are working, but also how accurate the master address file is. Here is an example of aerial imagery to help us understand where change is occurring in the address space on the ground. On the left side, you can see an earlier vintage of an imagery. On the right side, you can see a later vintage of the same imagery where you can see parts where there has been growth and new housing units. This helps us tremendously. Moving on to our second innovation area is optimizing self-response. In other words, how do we engage and motivate the public to respond? The goal of optimizing self-response is generate the largest possible self-response, thereby reducing the number of households requiring follow-up. This is about our efforts to engage and motivate people to self-respond to the census. The more we get people to self-respond, the fewer housing units we will have to knock on doors. The fewer doors we have to knock on, the less expensive the census will be, but also the more accurate the census will be. Why is this? We know that the accuracy of the census is increased when people self-respond. When you provide your own information about your own housing unit, about your own household, these are the best data we can possibly get. The 2020 census design of optimizing self-response includes key components that are designed to maximize self-response. The first of those components is the Integrated Partnership and Communications Campaign. To motivate people to respond, the 2020 census will include a nationwide communications and partnership campaign. This campaign is focused on getting people to respond on their own, as it costs significantly less to conduct a response, less to process a response provided via the internet or through the paper questionnaire than it does to send a field worker to someone's home to collect their responses. Advertising will make heavy use of digital media, tailoring the message to the audience. The second component is tailored contact strategies and mailed invitation letters. We're going to reach the American public by using a combination of mailed invitation letters to encourage them to respond and our ability to do non-ID processing. What's very important about this census is that this is a multi-mode census. People will have the opportunity to respond using the internet, mail, or phone. These are changes for us from the 2010 census where we did not offer internet as a response option. We have learned through testing that this is what people want, and we can increase self-response by having these options. For example, in our 2015 census test, in the 20 counties surrounding Savannah, Georgia, we tested our ability to optimize self-response. We started with the mail contact letters and encouraged people to go to the internet. As soon as we sent out the letters, the phones began ringing in our telephone centers. So we looked at the data of the calls coming in, why they were calling, what their demographics were, and we learned a lot. And what we learned from this test were further supported from the information that we have seen from the American Community Survey or the Census Bureau's economic surveys, is that when we move to the use of the internet, call volume increases. The first mailing we sent out to people is called the Internet Push, which is a letter with an invitation to respond online. There is a large subset of the population, generally over the age of 50, predominantly over the age of 65, that when they receive the letter, they call. When we asked them why they were calling, it was for a couple of reasons. Either they do not have internet access, or they do, but they do not want to use the internet for this purpose. These are the people that want to respond. That's why they're calling. What we want to do is that when they call, we immediately pivot and let them know we are happy to take a response over the phone. Don't worry about the questionnaire. Let's do this right now. The other reason people call is because they have technical questions. Their mouse isn't working, their screen is not displaying. They are calling because they want to respond and are there to take the responses. Now, during the census, for about 20% of the addresses where there may be low internet connectivity and where there is an older population, we will include a paper questionnaire in the first mailing. We know that they're going to respond, and we want to make it easy for them. The last element of optimizing self-response is our ability to do real-time non-ID processing. Essentially what that means is when we send you a mailed invitation letter, we include an identification number. So when you log into the internet to respond, the first thing we do is enter that ID. Non-ID processing is responding to the census without that identification number. Conceptually, that sounds simple. However, remembering the goal of the census, which is to count everyone once, only once, and in the right place, which means that ID is our key to linking the response to what we have in our master address file. So if someone is responding without it, we need a way of linking them back together. Now, real-time ID, non-ID allows us to do this in real time. This is something we have been working on over the last few years. What we are able to do is allow people to log in without the ID and enter an address. An address standardizer will come up to confirm the address based on what we have in our records, and if so, we move on. Now, if not, we will move to a series of screens where we have the respondent help us understand what their address is, and those screens will lead to a pin drop screen where they can place their housing unit on a map. This helps us on the back end to do that matching. Now, based on the data collected from the 2015 Optimizing Self-Response test in Savannah, we were able to match about 99% of those addresses coming in that way. Now, by optimizing self-response, we are making it easy for people to respond anytime and anywhere. Again, we will do this through a combination of tailored contact strategies and non-ID processing. We know that most people will respond with their census ID. However, the ability to do real-time non-ID processing opens up worlds of possibilities for the hard-to-count and those addresses previously unmailable. It allows us to make the census mobile and expand Be Counted to a full part of the census. Here are some screenshots of our self-response internet instrument. On the left side is what a respondent would see if they logged in through a desktop computer. And on the right, you see the version that has been optimized for mobile devices. Moving on to our third innovation is utilizing administrative records and third-party data. Our goal is to use information people have already provided to reduce expensive in-person follow-up. Once we have completed 6 weeks of self-response, we then prepare our efforts for non-response follow-up. In order for us to reduce the workload, we plan to use information already provided to help reduce this workload. For the people that do not respond to the Census Bureau will use the most cost-effective strategy for contacting and counting people. We will reduce the number of visits by using the available data from administrative records and third-party data. Now, these data may be used to identify vacant housing units, determine the best time of day to visit a particular neighborhood, or count the population and fill in the responses with existing high-quality data from trusted sources. A reduced number of visits will lead to significant cost savings. It can also allow us to focus our field resources to achieve consistent response rates across geographic areas and demographic groups, and where we do not have high-quality information, where that population is truly hard to count. Now, at the highest level, from the design and operational perspective, first, we do self-response. We engage, we motivate, we have partnership specialists, we encourage people to respond to the census. And based on the testing we have done thus far for the 2020 census, we estimate that 63.5% of the population will self-respond. Once we have completed the self-response period, we then use administrative records and third-party data to help us identify vacant housing units. These are housing units based on the information we have that we believe that there is nobody living in this housing unit. There is no need to send someone to knock on the doors. In 2010, we conducted 48 million non-response follow-up visits, and of those 48 million, 15 million of those were vacant housing units. In other words, we sent people out to multiple times to knock on doors of housing units that data sources have confirmed that there is nobody living there. Those are resources we can use somewhere else. The first way that we will use these data are for addresses that we believe we have good administrative records and remove vacant housing units from the workload. We will send those addresses that we have identified as vacant one additional mailing only as a precaution, just to ensure that we have counted everyone once, only once, and in the right place. After we have removed the vacant addresses, we are going to knock on each of the remaining housing units at least once. We believe that knocking on each one of those remaining housing units at least once, we can resolve about 22% of all those cases with just one visit. After we have done that, we will then look to administrative records and third-party data to help us conduct our next visit. And for those addresses where we have good administrative records, we will remove those from the workload and we will use those records for the housing unit. At that point, we will continue to knock on the doors of the remaining housing units multiple times. That is our approach for how we will be using administrative records and third-party data. The goal is to use information people have already provided to reduce expensive in-person follow-up while maintaining high-quality data for the census. Our fourth innovation area is re-engineered field operations. The use of administrative records and third-party data, combined with our efforts to re-engineer our field operations, means that we will have a very different field operation for the 2020 census. We know that not everyone will respond. Again, we're predicting at least 63.5% self-response rate, and then we will conduct non-response follow-up operation. For the 2020 census, we plan to use technology to more efficiently and effectively manage the 2020 census fieldwork. We expect to achieve additional cost savings from the result of using automation to streamline in-field census taking, where field workers will use handheld devices for collecting the data. Operations such as recruiting, training, payroll will be automated, thereby reducing the time and staff required for these activities. New operational control centers will rely on automation to manage the work, enabling more efficient case management, automatic determination of optimal travel routes for our enumerators, and reduction of the number of physical offices. In general, a streamlined operation and management structure is expected to increase productivity and save costs. This is our goal for re-engineering field operations, again, to use technology to more efficiently and effectively manage the 2020 census fieldwork. What you're seeing here is our mobile application that will help enumerators conduct non-response follow-up. These three pictures, I want to make it clear that our data have been blurred out from here, are what our enumerators see on their handheld device. The goal of re-engineering field operations is to use technology to more efficiently and effectively conduct and manage the 2020 census fieldwork. The Census Bureau has developed an operational control system that manages tasks and makes some of the decisions that are typically made by humans, such as case assignments and timing and number of contact attempts for enumerators. This screenshot was pulled from our operational control system. Please note that these are all test data. This slide depicts a dashboard for the local supervisor of operations. On the left side of the screen, a supervisor's primary team report is displayed. This provides the supervisor with some high-level summary information about each staff member that they oversee. And then below it is a list of today's working enumerators. Now, on the right side of the screen that you see, you will see the queue of alerts. This functions as a to-do list for the supervisors. Alerts are the backbone of the system. The system regularly examines employees' work and then generates alerts when unexpected results are encountered or when an enumerator doing a great job and is following procedure and performance expectations. Earlier, I discussed the importance of engaging and motivating people to self-respond to the census to reduce the number of households requiring follow-up. This will be accomplished through efforts such as integrated partnership and communications campaign and providing various options for self-response, such as the Census Questionnaire Assistant. The Census Bureau is currently in the process of identifying contractors to provide these services during the 2020 census. The Integrated Communications Contract is just one part of the 2020 Census Integrated Partnership and Communications Program. This contract is very important in that it supports the 2020 Census Program's mission to conduct a complete and accurate census in 2020. The Partnership and Communications Program is the public face of the census. So this contract is a key foundation for a successful census and is one of the key strategies for maximizing self-response. As you can see on this timeline, we released the final request for proposal in January of this year, and we have received written proposals from offers and plan to announce our selection in August. The 2020 Census Questionnaire Assistance Operation will facilitate a questionnaire response by fielding questions, completing interviews with respondents, and supporting follow-up and quality assurance operations. This operations will offer voice, web chat, and email contact channels, as well as interactive voice response, which are self-service solutions to automate some of the tasks, and also the outbound operations within the Census Questionnaire Assistance to be used to verify respondent information as a follow-up activity. Now, this contract will support the upcoming 2017 census test, the 2018 census end-to-end test, and ultimately the 2020 census. And as you see on this timeline, we released the final request for proposal in January of this year, and we have received initial proposals from offers and plan to award the contract in June. Please also note that my colleagues Kevin Zajac, the Chief of Census Questionnaire Assistance, and Mary Bucci, the Chief of Partnership and Outreach, will be joining us during the Q&A session today to answer any additional questions about these contracts. So let's now talk about where we are today with the 2020 operations. As you can see in this timeline, we have now moved from the research and testing phase, the red areas on the left, into operations and implementation, the blue shaded areas that you see. We have completed significant tests such as the 2014 census test, the 2015 optimizing self-response test, the 2015 census test, and the 2015 national content test. We use these findings from these tests to inform the design of the 2020 census. We're now working to refine many activities related to our self-response and non-response follow-up operations. And in this effort, we have just launched the 2016 census test. This is a site test that is currently occurring in parts of Harris County, Texas, and Los Angeles County, with approximately 225,000 housing units in each test site. Why were these sites selected? First, these are urban areas. LA is the second largest city in the U.S., and Houston is the fourth largest. Second, there is language diversity in both sites. During the 2015 test, we had to de-scope work related to the language program and needed to ramp this up during this test in 2016. Both of these test sites contain diverse non-English speaking populations with concentrations of people of limited English proficiency. Third, these sites were selected based on demographic diversity, seeing a good mix of Hispanic, Asian, white, and Black populations. Fourth, there are high vacancy rates. And fifth, the internet usage, with both sites nearing 80% of the households with high-speed internet. The self-response objectives of this test include providing non-English support, both in terms of our contact strategies and response options, forming partnerships and conducting outreach efforts to reach historically hard-to-count populations, and refining real-time non-ID processing methods. Non-response follow-up objectives include finalizing our strategy for using administrative records in support of non-response follow-up, testing multiple ratios of enumerator to supervisors, implementing enhanced procedures for conducting interviews at multi-unit structures, and also continuing to refine our use of technology and automation to re-engineer field operations. During the self-response phase, we are deploying 5 self-response contact strategy panels with multiple mailings to encourage self-response. There will be partnership activities to reach demographically diverse populations, as well as language support to limited English proficient populations through non-English questionnaires, through the internet, paper, telephone, and NERFU, non-response follow-up, as well as multilingual brochures and language inserts, as well as outgoing envelopes with messages written in non-English languages. We will also be using a new internet software application called Primus, and we will be refining our real-time non-ID processing method. We are working to form strong partnerships during the 2016 census test. Partnership specialists support recruiting and are engaged in partnership effort with language support, primarily Spanish, Chinese, and Korean, and also have a social media presence to help the community know we are testing in their areas. We also have a statistics in schools to leverage schools to help inform parents. Partnership toolkits were developed for both test sites, and contents included fast facts about the census test, article samples, event hosting tips, social media content, and list of places with public computers and important internet URLs. And here is the list of language support for the 2016 census test. We have the internet questionnaire available in English, Spanish, Chinese, and Korean, as well as paper questionnaires, mailing materials, and non-response follow-up instruments and materials in those languages as well. We also have telephone questionnaire assistance that's available in English, Spanish, Chinese, both in Mandarin and Cantonese, Korean, Vietnamese, Tagalog, Arabic, and French, as well as web pages with downloadable information in Spanish, Chinese, Korean, Vietnamese, Japanese, Tagalog, Arabic, Farsi, Dari, French, Burmese, and Thai. The 2016 census test will also allow us to operationalize our new methods and new technology of multiple locations and time zones during non-response follow-up. Our objectives related to non-response follow-up include determining the non-response follow-up strategy for the 2020 census, how we use administered records to reduce the non-response follow-up universe, and to determine the number of contacts we make with each non-responding housing unit, refinement of our field management staffing structure, what is the best ratio for enumerators to local supervisors of operations, making enhancements to our operational control system and the enumerator device, and automated applications for field recruiting and administration. We will also focus on quality control, such as the use of paradata and GPS points collected during the interview. The non-response follow-up portion of the 2016 test will begin on May 12th of this year. So let's now talk about our remaining years leading to the 2020 operations. In addition to the 2016 census test, we will be conducting the address canvassing test this fall to measure the effectiveness of in-office and in-field address canvassing. In 2017, we will be conducting the 2017 census test to test the feasibility of collecting tribal enrollment information, as well as testing our update enumerate operations. In addition, we will conduct the 2017 Puerto Rico census test to test the utility of the updated Puerto Rico master address file, including frame updating, self-response, and field enumeration, as well as developing, testing, and deploying systems in Puerto Rico. In 2018, we will conduct the 2018 census end-to-end test to test and validate identified 2020 census operations, procedures, systems, infrastructure to ensure proper integration and conformance with functional and non-functional requirements. We'll also be producing a prototype of geographic and data products. Our goal is to have the entire operational design for 7 major operations ready for production from a systems, operational, and architectural perspective. This test will include significant field data collection components, and the timing of the field operations will mimic the 2020 census. This test is in early planning stages, and findings from the address canvassing test and the 2017 census test will be used to develop the test plan. And all of this brings us to the new design for the 21st century. At its simplest, this is what the census is about: establishing where to count, motivating people to respond, counting the population, and releasing the census results. So thank you so much for your attention today and your interest in the 2020 census program, and I look forward to hearing your feedback and answering any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. covering that information. There's a lot of really great updates and information for folks to reflect on and digest. So we want to now turn to the Q&A portion of the webinar. Operator, could you provide instructions, please, for how folks can join?
Thank you, ma'am. We will now begin the question and answer session. Participants, if you would like to ask a question over the phone, you may press star followed by the number 1. Please unmute your phone and record your name clearly when prompted. Your name is required to introduce your question. And to withdraw your request, you may press star followed by the number 2. One moment, please, as we wait for the first question.
So this is Priscilla from the White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. While folks are queuing up for their questions and comments, I thought I could start us off with a question for you, Jennifer. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on different examples or sources that you're using for third-party data and administrative records.
Okay, so I'm going to have Mary Bucci, who's going to answer that question for us.
Hi, this is Mary Bucci. I'm the Chief of Partnerships and Outreach, and some of the data would be, for instance, we use the U.S. Postal Service. We get files on undeliverable as addressed. We are working with the states. There's some Medicare files that we have tried to get that would help us with information about children, and we're looking at entering into memorandums of understanding with the IRS so that there is data that gets used for the census that people might be using to fill out their taxes and some of that sort of thing. And so that would be something that is data that is already provided to the government that we could use to save money for the 2020 census. So those are a couple of examples of some of the agreements that we have entered into for data.
Great, thank you. Operator, do we have any other questions?
At this time, ma'am, we don't have any questions on queue, but once again, to ask a question, that is star followed by the number 1.
So this is Priscilla from the White House Initiative again. I'll take another opportunity to ask another question then. So many of the community members that WHIAAPI and many of the agencies work with have been very active, either formally or informally, in partnership with the census. So Dr. Kim, you've covered a lot of the partnership opportunities. I'm wondering if you can take some more time, I think, to describe perhaps other ways that groups can connect and partner with the census for the upcoming count in 2020.
Priscilla, I'm actually going to hand over to Mary Bucci again, who is the Chief of Outreach.
So this is Mary Bucci again, and we actually look very broadly for opportunities to participate with any size organization. We consider organizations that have contact with the communities to be trusted voices, and we really rely on them to get messages to their constituents in support of the census. And so our partnership efforts for 2020 will range from churches to small businesses, mom and pop stores, the dry cleaner, the little corner store, to large corporations, and we will explore any ideas on the side of the partners or the side of the Census Bureau staff on how, especially with new technology, there's a lot of new ways that we can reach out to people to further these partnerships, both in traditional paper and using the new technology. And so we're really open to and looking to hear from people. We will have partnership specialists all across the United States. They will, we had 124 languages that we spoke or wrote or read in our partnership area in 2010. I only expect that to grow for 2020. So we're very excited about the opportunities for growth in our partnership area for the 2020 census.
Great, thank you. Perhaps there might be folks. Oh, go ahead.
Thank you. Our first question comes from the line of Erica McBride. Ma'am, your line is now open.
Yes, hi. I actually had two questions, and one of them was the outreach, and thank you for answering that. But my second question was regarding, and I may have misunderstood, I know during the target areas in Houston and in Los Angeles, that the languages, you had mentioned Spanish, Chinese, and Korean were going to be some of those languages that different forms, online sites were going to be translated into those languages. I was just curious, how would you capture those individuals who may be of African descent and maybe Kenyan, Somalian, Congo, or what have you? Or are you finding that those particular groups speak English? Or how would you go about capturing those individuals? Would there be translations for the languages that they speak?
Thank you for that question. So as I had mentioned earlier, there were plans to do more of the ramping up the language testing starting 2010, but due to some budgetary constraints, we had to postpone most of our language testing in 2016. So there will be a lot. We will be scaling up as we course towards 20, but this was first large-scale effort to add additional languages. You may be aware, but most of the testing that has been done, or the mid-decade testing that we have done, have been in English and Spanish. So it's really important that we expand into other languages, but do it in a scalable fashion, so we don't add a whole group of them without really figuring out how will our systems work, how will our forms design, how will the different ways that we're testing, the way that we capture the language responses, how will this work? So this was our first effort at it. But moving on, what we're doing from the Census Bureau is we have been monitoring the language needs at a national level throughout the years, and just monitoring if there are any trends and changes. In 2010, we had the questionnaires available in 5 languages that were statistically showing as top language needs in the United States. We anticipate that for 2010, because in 2020, since we are optimizing different innovations in technology, that we will be expanding into that. But in terms of the final decisions on which languages will be supported and the level of that support, we will need to do a little bit more research and finalize that in the next couple of years.
At this time, ma'am, we don't have any questions on queue.
Okay. So this is Priscilla from the White House Initiative again. I think perhaps it would be interesting for the speakers to hear, or perhaps Mary, if you have some examples you could share. Going back to the partnership opportunities again, this is something we hear about a lot of inquiries from our community members and many of the commissioners as well. who have been involved in past census counts have heard of some innovative examples for how groups can be involved to help promote the census. Have there been any best practices that either folks who are participating in the webinar would like to share with the census as something that was really meaningful for their communities, or vice versa, again, for the census folks, if you've heard of any strategies that have worked particularly well that you're planning to adopt for the next census count?
So this is Mary Bucci. I know that you had directed it to the audience, but I will say that in the 2015 test, one of my favorite examples of what I thought was a perfect partnership was we were in Savannah for the 2015 census test, and there was a Hilton, I think it might have been a Hilton retirement community, and early on, they partnered with us. And so we went out, maybe we went and spoke once or twice at their monthly meetings of the retirement community. The retirement community took language that we sent out. Dr. Kim told you about our partner toolkit, and in the toolkit we have languages for emails and community newsletters and blogs, and the retirement community took all of those and put them out there, and then we went out once or twice and we brought tablets with us when we went. And we had an astronomical response rate from that community alone. And they had a ball. They enjoyed going out on the internet and working with the young partnership specialists that came. They felt very important to be, participating in this important test. And it really was I think in the new environment, by having an online census, it really is going to change the opportunities for interaction with the community and be more, actually sort of be more hands-on, if you will, even though it's online. I think there's a lot of opportunities, and we intend to be in the field in 2020. All of us government workers, we all have our own phones. All you got to do is go out onto census.gov, and the Respond Now button will be right there. So there's so many ways that we can help people to get full counts in the communities and in the neighborhoods. So I know you had asked it for the other people to respond, but I did want to give you that example because it really was a great partnership in the 2015 census test.
Thank you, Mary. Operator, are there any other questions in the queue?
Yes, ma'am. Our next question comes from the line of Marco Bagnes. Sir, your line is now open.
Hi, this is Marco Bagnes from the Department of the Navy. I have a question about adding the MENA, Middle East, and Northern Africa demographic, taking away from whites and Asians. Is that still happening for the Census 2020? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. So just for the other audience members who may not be aware, we had a national test last year called the 2015 National Content Test, where we tested different variations in asking our questions about race, ethnicity, with relationship and within household coverage. MENA, the Middle Eastern North African category, was a new response category that was tested during the NCT. The test ended in December of last year, and we are in the process of analyzing the data. We have not had the findings to inform us, but there were different variations of asking the questions in general. So as you know, we follow the OMB guidelines on the federal statistics on race and ethnicity. And what we had heard from the community members and other types of engagement is that we heard from the community that there was a need for us to also tabulate responses from people of the Middle Eastern and North African category. So that is one of the responses that we have tested. In terms of moving forward with 2020, because we do not have the results or the analysis, I cannot answer whether we will be moving towards using that category for 2020. We expect to have some of our preliminary results later this year in the summer into the fall.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question comes from the line of Veronica Navarro. Ma'am, your line is now open.
Hi. I just wanted to ask about the contracts. Is that for public affairs and media companies to do some paid media outreach to specific target communities? Just trying to get some more up that things.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have Mary Bucci talk in more detail about the communications contract, and we also have Kevin Zajac from the Census Questionnaire Assistance, the other contract that I had mentioned. I'm going to ask him to follow Mary in terms of providing a bit more information about these contracts. So let me hand it off to Mary first.
Hi, this is Mary Bucci. The contract is for someone or someones. There could be a scenario where organizations got together and are putting in a response. But for the communications contract, it is for people to organize all communications and partnership outreach and manage that outreach for the 2020 census. So it is actually aimed at the entire United States and Puerto Rico, and they would be responding to the RFP with strategies that they were going to undertake to communicate appropriately and effectively with everybody in the United States and in Puerto Rico. So that's what the communications contract is, and I'll have Kevin can talk about the call center contract.
Yeah. So this is Kevin Zajac, and I'm in charge of questionnaire assistance operations for the 2020 census. And the Census Questionnaire Assistance contract, it really has to do with providing services for questionnaire assistance for the 2017 test, the 2018 end-to-end test, and then the 2020 census. And so basically it covers like the infrastructure, the staffing, and and it's available during these tests and during the 2020 census to answer questions about the census questionnaire, any general questions about the Census Bureau or about the census in general, and also to collect data over the phone from respondents that choose to report their data over the phone. So that's kind of at a high level what the questionnaire assistance contract is all about.
Thank you. At this time, speakers, we don't have any questions on queue.
Okay. So this is Priscilla from the White House Initiative again. I think if there are no further questions, we can go ahead and conclude the call. Thank you for joining us. This webinar has been recorded and will be made available on WHIAAPI's YouTube site. Everyone who registered for the webinar will receive a link to that once the video and the audio have been uploaded. Thank you again for joining our webinar, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. And that concludes today's conference. Thank you all for participating. You may now disconnect.